Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger 1533. And finally we come to the concluding remarks of an apocalyptic tone recently adopted in philosophy by Jacques Derrida. She is amazing. It was one of the most complex texts that we went into. Well, we haven't started with the next one yet, the No. It was extremely interesting, thought-provoking, and I will go into the last part, currently at page 35, and I will remind you that we have ventured into what temporality could be. The movement, and Derrida has been using tropes to come, or the coming, and obviously we also have the apocalyptic tone, which is signifying something that is coming. Not yet there. It's a promise. It's a wish. And the last sentence I wrote, this is very good. Come does not announce this or that apocalypse. Already it resounds with a certain tone. It is in itself the apocalypse of apocalypse. Come is apocalyptic. I continue, it's the second paragraph on page 35, beginning with our. Our apocalypse now. There would be no more chance, save chance itself, for a thought of good and evil, whose announcement would come to gather itself in order to be with itself in a revelatory speaking. More chance, unless a chance. The unique chance itself, for a collection of truth, allegen of aletheia. That would no longer be a legendary unveiling, and no more chance even for such a gathering of gift, dispatch, destiny. For the destination of a come, whose promise at least would be assured of its own proper event. But then, what is someone doing who says to you, I tell you this, I have come to tell you this. There is not, there has never been, there will never be apocalypse. The apocalypse is disappointing. There is the apocalypse without apocalypse. The word "sa," without, I pronounce here in the so necessary syntax of Blanchot, who often says X without X. The without marks an internal and external catastrophe of the apocalypse. An overturning of sense that does not merge with a catastrophe announced or described in the apocalyptic writings without, however, being foreign to them. Here, the catastrophe would perhaps be of the apocalypse itself, its fold and its end, a closure without end, an end without end. Do you think here for helpful lead of David Bohm's enfolding of the hollow movement? What is implicit and explicit? And that it's the folding process that is the reality, where both implicit and explicit are participatory. I will just reread it because it's so good. Here the catastrophe would perhaps be of the apocalypse itself, its fold and its end, a closure without end, an end without end. But what reading, what history of reading, what philology, what hermeneutic competence authorizes one to say that this very thing, this catastrophe of the apocalypse is not the catastrophe described in its movement and in its very course, in its outline, or that apocalyptic writing. For example, the one from Patmos that would then be doomed to going out of itself in this aleatory errands. And what if this outside of apocalypse was inside the apocalypse? And what if this outside of apocalypse was inside the apocalypse? It's a play on inside and outside, or nay, even more than that, showing the insideness of the insideness being the outside. What if it was the apocalypse itself? What precisely breaks in the common? What is inside and what is outside? A text of this text, both inside and outside, these volumes, of which we do not know whether they are open or closed. Of this volume written, you remember on the inside and out. It is said at the very end, do not seal this, put your stamp. Do not seal the words of the inspiration of this volume. Do not seal, that is to say, do not close, but also do not sign. The end approaches. now there is no more time to tell the truth about the apocalypse. But what are you doing? All of you will still insist to what ends? Do you want to come when you come to tell us, here now, let's go, come, the apocalypse, it's finished. I tell you this, that's what's happening. And that was also the end of an apocalyptic tone, recently adopted in philosophy by Jacques Derrida. Since there is a failure of text, I will cross-read it with the following, one of the greater Derrida interlocutors, Arkady Plotnitsky. It's downloadable on the net. The paradoxical interplay of exactitude and indefiniteness. And I will start at page 200, the second paragraph, beginning with a non-classical or romantic ontological hypothesis. The non-classical or romantic ontological hypothesis, while it assumes that the world exists, is real, rejects the applicability of the principle of causality, and even more fundamentally, the assumption that one could assign or even conceive of the ultimate constitution of reality. Such concepts as things, world, causality, architecture, constitution, or any other possible concept could only apply within certain limits, and within certain limits they must apply. Although it is difficult and arguably impossible ever to know these limits completely, as Heisenberg observed in commenting on Kant. At the ultimate level, however, these and any other concepts cannot apply. In philosophy, this view or hypothesis was arguably first advanced by Nietzsche, in part again by way of critique of causality. As to give one example, in the famous chapter, How the True World Finally Became a Fable, of Twilights of the Idols. As I argue here, however, this view had previously been adopted by several Romantic authors, some of whom might have influenced Nietzsche. Especially given that in both cases confrontations with Kant are at stake. The same type of view then emerged in Bohr's and other interpretations of quantum phenomena and quantum mechanics in the spirit of Copenhagen. My comment here, the Copenhagen interpretation is the most universalized and non-telling, really. The situation becomes especially enigmatic, even mysterious, when the effects in question exhibit certain forms of order along with randomness, as they do in quantum physics. Where does this order come from? The underlying classical-like order would be a natural answer, were it compatible with these statistical correlations, which it is not. The incompatibility being reflected in the so-called Bell and Kochen-Specker theorems. The non-classical or romantic answer is that we do not, or more radically, cannot know, or even conceive of how this order or this randomness comes about. They are effects of that which is neither ordered nor random, any more than anything else. There's no story to be told, and no concept to be formed concerning the processes that lead to this order or this randomness. Fortunately for us, quantum theory predicts, it follows, probabilistically or statistically, these effects in accordance with what is experimentally observed. However, we can and even must form concepts and tell stories concerning how such experiments are confirmed. The subtitle 2 here, the key concepts of non-classical theory. This section is designed to explain my key concepts, given that I consider concepts operative beyond romanticism. I shall, for the sake of economy, primarily speak of non-classical concepts, while indicating their role or genealogy in romantic thought whenever necessary. I begin with ontology, by which I understand what is claimed to be possible to say or represent, or, in the first place, to think concerning the ultimate constitution of things in a given domain. Thus, ontology is not a claim concerning the existence of something, say, material bodies in physics or thoughts in psychology or philosophy. But also and primarily a claim concerning the character of this existence. He is following the Heideggerian take, separating ontology from the ontic. It's all down to the character of existence. Realist theories are essentially ontological theories. This terminological difference is in part due to the relative prominence given to the language of ontology in post-Heideggerian continental philosophy, and the language of realism in the philosophy of science. Although the term ontology is found in the philosophy of science as well. These terms also reflect the difference between Greek ontology and Latin realism, and the translations from one to another, which difference elicited some reflections by Heidegger. In part, defined his preference for ontology. But that subject is beyond my scope. And my comment here is what we've been discussing in of the apocalyptic tone recently adopted in philosophy, where we read Latin expressions and Greek expressions side by side, and thereby a most difficult and important point is made. The Greek ontology often connecting to ousia and estein, whereas the Latin realism brings out a completely different tone, almost like empiricism. The limits of ontological or realist theories are defined by the fundamental assumptions of Kant's philosophy. As already indicated, Kant's epistemology places the ultimate noumenal reality beyond our knowledge, or understanding based on this knowledge. Both of which are associated strictly with phenomena or appearances to our minds. And here we have the Cartesian cut in a nutshell. However, while beyond knowledge, Kant's noumena are not beyond thought. They are, according to Kant, thinkable insofar as this thinking is logical. As mentioned, Kant associates this type of thinking with reason, Vernunft, a higher faculty that can reach the ultimate nature of things, whereas understanding, Verstand, applies to phenomena only. Kant recognizes that our thinking concerning the character of noumena, or things in themselves, might be wrong, even if it works in practice. However, his view of the situation still logically implies that this thinking may also be correct, even though it may not be possible to verify its correctness. Indeed, Kant argues that some claims of reason are in fact determinately correct. As Kant also argues, under this assumption that the truth of our conception of ultimate reality is only possible rather than determinate, this conception need not be justified in theoretical terms. A practical justification defined by the workability of such a conception may suffice. However, because such a conception might still be true, this view implies at least the possibility of a representation of reality, albeit one that is never guaranteed to be correct or verifiable. At the very least, then, realist theories assume that the concept of structure can in principle apply to this constitution, no matter how far off the mark may be anything we can come up with in conceiving of this constitution. The hope is that our theories can capture, even if approximately, something of this architecture. Romantic thinking or quantum theoretical thinking in the spirit of Copenhagen not only avoids making any of these assumptions, it actually disallows them. In parentheses, shut up and calculate. This thinking does assume that certain entities, material or mental, which define the ultimate constitution of physical nature considered in quantum physics, or the ultimate nature of things in life in romantic thinking, exist, are real. However, the character of this existence is such that it prevents us from describing or even from forming a conception of these entities and behavior. There may thus be a reality without realism. And underline this. I press this. There may thus be a reality without realism, insofar as no conception of this reality, or in Jacques Lacan's terms, the real is possible, keeping in mind that reality too remains a provisional name. My comment, it's not a permanent name, it's provisional, momentarily. One could still speak of ontology in this case, which justify my use of non-classical or romantic ontology. Ontological considerations are applicable to actual phenomena or events, which are effects of that reality which is beyond the reach of thought, and hence of realism or ontology. There may be, and there must be, ontological or realist representations of events. But there are no representations or conceptions of how these events ultimately come about. The lack of causality is an automatic consequence. And my comment here, it's absolutely vital to look into causality, which is first and what is causative. What makes the other thing to come into existence? Is it a sort of pre-existence? Or is it a force by itself? As Erwin Schrödinger observed with some disparagement, by this point seeing quantum mechanics, which he helped to create, as the doctrine born of distress. If a classical, quote from Schrödinger, if a classical state does not exist at any moment, it can hardly change causally. Very important. The distress Schrödinger was feeling was what he felt, at least initially, to be the dissolvement of classical causality. I understand causality as an ontological category, part of reality that pertains to objects or systems whose behavior is defined by the fact that the state of such an object or system is, in principle, determined at all times by its state at a particular moment of time. Indeed, any given moment of time. Put a pause there maybe. Well, I just make a small summary. We see a connection here between the former text when we go into what Arkady Plotnitsky calls causative factors. What is the origin? And I would also like to bring to forth the very interesting translation between Latin and Greek, which Derrida used extensively in the text that we just went through, in order to parallel ousia estein with the Roman Latin empiricism. It will be important later when we go into the, well, let's call it cardinal and ordinal, first, second, third, or 1, 2, 3. Newtonian mechanics is closer to 1, 2, 3. Cardinal numbers. Let me put the pause there and continue. So I will try to make a short summary here and look to the one of the most pertinent details here. And a quote that could be helpful at the very end of Jacques Derrida's text. And what if this outside of apocalypse was inside the apocalypse? What if it was the apocalypse itself? What precisely breaks in the the thing to be? And at the zest of this lies something that we took up earlier, and Arkady Plotnitsky enters into the interesting difference between ordinality and cardinality. Ordinality is first, second, third, fourth. They have a specific order of their happenings. And it could be called an order, a sequence, and it can also be called the inside, what we determined, our subjective take on something. that to be compared to what we normally perceive determinism to be as cardinal. And cardinal is more in the sense of conglomerations, that the sheer mass, as I tried to show here with my atoms, the sheer mass or numbers are causative. We can compare that to the tendency for non-determinism in chaos theory. Some 15-20 lectures ago we went into John Gribbin and chaos. And there we know that one thing is first, for instance, the flap of the butterfly's wings. So it's not cardinality in chaos theory or fractality. It is most definitely ordinality, the order. In the normal thinking that was absolutely normal until Konrad Lorenz and later Benoit Mandelbrot showed clearer and clearer that ordinality is what turns the wheel of realism or reality. What comes first is actually almost not important in cardinality, or you could also call this the Newtonian Cartesian take. I call it NC for short. In this take, it doesn't come from the inside. It comes mystagogically somewhere from the outside. And this is what I think, in my way of seeing the thing, one of the things that Derrida is pointing to in his play with words in the mystagogue. It's not here hard to see either. In this, we have a sort of dilution. Everything is diluted. If we add one thing, nothing changes here. The sheer mass will be causative. A big mountain will cause much more than a small mountain or a little rock. A dust of grain cannot cause anything. The mass is decisive. Very helpful for me here was the shofar earlier in the text. Sounding the shofar, this absolute littleness brought down the walls of Jericho. This is in absolute parallel to quantum mechanics, as how it's depicted by Arkady Plotnitsky. But it's important that first is the shofar. I'm not very good at depicting a shofar, but we used to make lectures in Sköllersta, where there was something looking very similar to a shofar from Jerusalem. But think about the shofar here as a resounding Klein bottle. If I can draw it here. You can actually produce a sound with the Klein bottle, but it comes from the inside, not from the supposed externality of the classical model. The inside of the one who blows the shofar can bring things down. A thought in my head, a wish in my heart, and the apocalypse itself is stemming ultimately from the insidedness. Often, insidedness is reduced to what we call subjective. Ego, I. But it's much more. Calling it just the ego reduces it, the I, as we mentioned in the previous lecture, 1532. It is much more grand. I'll just bring it out. Come cannot come from a voice, or least from a tone signifying I or self. And so in my determination. It is more, it becomes more, and I think you can see in this take all our determinations, intentions, wants, and wishes sort of gets diluted in the multitudes of atoms and happenings and connections. What actually is the case, there is a true thirst, and this is causative in quite another way. This is what initially sort of made Schrödinger disparaged, and I can imagine there was this early period before he came to a deeper understanding. But it also shows that this ordinality is so ingrained in us, so we sort of lose our power to be telling, and we sort of get reduced to these small atoms in the universe. And that was exactly how we came across it in my home country of Sweden, when we listened to Carl Sagan and his fantastic TV series, The Cosmos, where he reiterated several times, we are so small in the cosmos. We are just a grain or a dust, grain of sand. So our causal in the cardinality must be so completely neglectable as to be nothing. That's the old determinism. That's the determinism of Newton, Descartes, and I would say the determinism that is in common sense nowadays. This is what we accept, take for granted, that our intentions are so infinitesimal, small, insignificant, having no influence on the greater cosmos or the greater scheme of things. Another way we can look at it is to also remember how Kant thought that mathematics did not take an active doing or thinking or intention. It happens by itself, as in within the shopkeeper. That mathematics is depersonalized, uncontextualized, and proven to be wrong. It doesn't do it by itself. This leads to passivity, but it also in another way is passivity. The apocalypse can be seen as something vibrant, a string that is taut. And I mentioned that before. This is most definitely taut with this spelling. And we'll be able to have taught, to have shown. This is slack. It's the D-tone voice. Doesn't have the force, does not have the intention or the spiral directionality. I'm trying to copy here when I'm standing as far as I can. Yeah, Kalle, maybe comment. I'm going to put you into the picture as well. A bit more to that. Yeah.
Let me return to the enigmatic phrase on page 32. The voices, the places, the roots of come traverse the partition of a song. A book of citational and recitative echoes, as if it began by responding, and it is a traversal of this transference. The voices find the spacing, the space of their movement, but they nullify it with one stroke. They no longer give it time. So in the previous lecture we discussed what does this mean, they no longer give it time. But we could perhaps now rewrite the word time with order, that is first, second, third, and so forth. That is, they say come, these voices, heavenly voices, they intermingle in the sense that there is no longer an order. But there is still, it's a little bit like this in heaven, perhaps in one sense. But I don't know if it's meant in negative sense, because this is in a negative sense that it's a difficult sentence. How we should understand. This is calm without order. The inside is the same as the outside. Everything is. The apocalypse is within apocalypse. We don't know. So the apocalypse began, but it's also postponed at the same time, perhaps. Time is nullified, perhaps. Since time is nullified, the apocalypse is both now and soon. But you need a narrator, because the next paragraph says there's a kind of general narrator here at the moment of the signature. He will call himself the witness. There's the angel messenger there whose dispatch he reports. There's John there who begins to speak again and says that at present he is prostrating himself before the messenger who speaks to him. He tells me, do not seal the words of the inspiration of this volume. Yes, the time is near. Revelation 22:10. The upper part of an order John could only disobey in order to obey. So yes, the time is near. So if the time is near, how can there be no time? Hmm. This time is near, it's already here.
It's already here, yeah.
Hmm.
Excellent, Kalle. I saw now directly when you say the witness, when there is an observer, that would be after the fact, and it will also always look after the fact that it was cardinality that caused the whole thing. Because then you look at all the masses, all the atoms in the universe in an after effect. And could be the point of this one, because it begins with com, the first, and it traversed the partition of a song. It goes somewhere. But with the stroke, we have the witness, and no longer is time present. It's a way of seeing this that is most interesting. Because we normal people, being in the determinate state, will see it as the mass is causative. And within Newtonian take and Cartesian thinking, and also in normal thinking, this is how we see it. That the absurdity of the first is there. It is causative. It's the first thing that does everything. It's the starter of an order or a sequence. The first is not unimportant at the outset. But then you see the whole thing, you observe, and you sort of collapse the superposition. And it will look like, the cat was always dead or alive. But that is in the aftermath. So it's a bit where one's place is one at this area or at this area. And I would say this is the greater area where you are creator yourself. The creator of universe, as one of the quantum physicists said. You are in on the things. And in a way, the apocalypse is inside of us. We are the telling starting instruments. The shofar of the first tone voice. Maybe another comment, Kalle?
So perhaps we could conclude here that time comes in only when there is a narrator, a witness, when an observation is made, back in quantum physics. But I might be wrong. At the end, it's the reader, the observer, who has to make the decision if there is time. In quantum physics, we know that there is no time until there is an observation or a measurement. So we have to go with science, so to say. and with the question of the chicken or the egg, there is no time until a measurement or an observation is made. Then we can see the egg perhaps came first or the vice versa. And in this case also the come. We have this, it's a kind of song, come, like a litany. There is no time, there is a lot of echo, but only when the song perhaps finishes, you can make an observation that it took so much long, this song. Then observation is made, then you can make analysis. And when you listen to a song like Come, this Heavenly Voices, there is a fractal time. You cannot hear the whole come only if you take in all the 4 letters, if it's in English. So time, you have to understand what we mean with time. It's a fractal time. And you cannot only hear only one word like O in come. So in order there to be time, you have to have the whole phrase, also the end, and then, so to say, grasp also the beginning. Like if you listen to a chorus in a church, for instance, if let's say that they would say come, they would not all say it's at the same time. There's always some disharmony. In that sense, there is no time in singing. Perhaps only fractal time. I give back to you, Hans.
Fantastic, Kalle. You really put the spot there with the song. Because if we don't capture the whole song sort of in one go, in the beginning, in the middle, or the end, we will not have a tune. We cannot listen to it tone by tone. It's the whole extension of the song. Later we can take it apart and say it's time there, but when you're in it, there is no time. It's a whole. Very good, Kalle. That helped me to understand. Thank you very much. The song is a very good metaphor for this. And since we've been discussing tone, also the sound of the shofar, and we spoke about stringed instruments, and the fractality comes in there, because it's mistuning constantly that makes possible of the tune, the melody, the song to come forward. And as we know, singing without raspberry notes or half notes will not be felt, will not be deep. It will sound mechanical, computer made, not having this wondrous feature of more complexity. And of course the egg comes in there. Afterwards we can say one or the other, but in a way they are like the song as well. Chicken and the egg, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a good head start. Kalle, concluding remark? You're looking at the paper and so on.
So page 35, let me return to this remark. What if this outside of Apocalypse was inside Apocalypse? So we can think about the metaphor about the song again. Yes, you can listen to a sound from the outside, but if you're in the song inside, your observer, participant is much more powerful. So he emphasizes that in observation, that is, you have to be inside the thing. You have to be inside the apocalypse to understand it. You have to be inside the Armageddon to understand it. And then when you are inside it, you observe it, and then you have it there. So it's about participation, observation. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. The engagement is the most important. And of course, in this after effect of Carl Sagan, we lose that intention, and thereby we sort of prove to ourselves, I don't have any significance in the world. So how could there be a superior being with even more significance? We lose that ability. This is really good telling that we have that possibility. It is supervenience from the very start, where we decide. It doesn't mean that it doesn't become objective still. It becomes more objective. As in the text that we read earlier by Paul Livingston, where often the fear is that we would lose objectivity. Objectivity is exactly what we gain, because this is the true construction of the universe. There is an ordinality. There is also afterwards a cardinality and an extended time, as in the song, or the sounding of a guitar or a concert. In order to be in it, you cannot divide. I can find this in a second here. That's page 9, as in the text, Wittgenstein, Mathematics and Temporality of Technique. So the procedure by engaging in mathematics does not mean that it will be subjective or not fully fixed. This is exactly the objectivity in process by engaging, by being there from the inside out. And it will become fully fixed as we desire, because we are always already in the world, engaged in a certain direction. Very good. I'll put a pause there. So we continue with the paradoxical interplay of exactitude and indefiniteness.
Page
205, and we are on the subtitle 3. Rhythm, Caesura and the unthinkable in Hölderlin. And to make it a bit of a leap start into it, it's about rhythm. We spoke about tone, songs earlier, tonality, and we can see ordinality, or the ordinary cause, in the first as causative and disturbance, as a tremor, zittern, the importance of a disturbance, of the interpenetrating innerness that comes to the outer. Romantic thinking, I argue, introduced a new concept of ontology, and with it a new ontological hypothesis. Although sometimes associated by the Romantics, including Hölderlin, with ancient Greek thinking, which is to say, their interpretation of this thinking. This ontology does not appear to have been developed before the Romantics, such as Kleist and Hölderlin in Germany, or Shelley and Keats in England. It emerged, I argue, in part in response to Hume's and Kant's philosophy, by taking their thinking to the limit that Hume and Kant had not envisioned or had been reluctant to accept. This is why I call this ontology romantic ontology. While keeping non-classical ontology as a more general conceptual designation. This ontology is juxtaposed to classical ontology, which allows for an ontology offering a conception and a representation of the ultimate nature of reality, usually, but not always, assumed to be causal. A paradigmatic example of classical causal ontology is Sophocles' Oedipus the King, where the apparently random or chance events are ultimately predetermined by the inescapable causal necessity of fate. No matter how one tries to circumvent fate. Or such is the case if one interprets the ultimate ontology of the events in the play in this way, an interpretation that Hölderlin's reading of the play questions. Also, insofar as this classical ontology might be presumed by Oedipus or other characters. In Hölderlin's reading, tragic fate is determined otherwise. Rather than a form of causal necessity, fate is a form of necessity without causality, or again, any ontological attributes. As will be seen, Musil suggests that destiny, a concept related to fate, may be giving a statistical meaning. The nature of fate is capture as that which is beyond capture by the structure of tragic representation, as the interplay of a rhythm and a caesura, a break in this rhythm. The character's ontological calculations and decisions, such as Oedipus' decision against Tiresias' advice to pursue his investigation of the murder of Laius, revealed to be Oedipus' father, are measured against this non-causal concept of fate and in relation to this structure. So it's a chaos theory butterfly effect we're after here, and it can be interwoven in the story itself. The Caesura reflect the fact that tragic fate will defeat these bets and plunge the character into chaos without return. This is how the structure of tragedy appears in Sophocles, in Hölderlin's reading. This structure is defined by a precise, calculable law, which relates the calculable to that which is unthinkable and hence incalculable. This law, it follows, implies the absence of causality, and yet also the impossibility of seeing the workings of fate as random. The situation is not unlike the way quantum mechanics calculates the possibilities of quantum events. In this case, in precise numerical terms, which it must do in order to be an exact science. So the numerical terms is deciding as well as predicting. The ancient Greeks did contemplate a reversal of the classical causal ontology. An ontology defined by the rule or misrule of chance, which makes all causal order an appearance or illusion. This ontology may be called the Jocasta ontology, because it was expressly stated by Jocasta, Oedipus' mother and wife, being Oedipus the king. Fear. What should a man fear? It's all chance. Chance rules our lives. Not a man on earth can see a day ahead, groping through the dark. Better to live at random, best we can. No appeal to probability is possible under these conditions. Next to nothing can be estimated with any degree of belief. There's no order, rhythm, or meaningful temporality either. Only a sequence of random discrete events. Jocasta's view is proven to be illusory in the play, because the lives of the characters are ruled by fate, defined either by a causal ontology or if one adopts Hölderlin's reading by necessity without causality. The effects of this fate are ultimately discrete and have randomness to them, but some of them are also rhythmic in their collective temporal structure, in accord at the level of effects with another ontology contemplated by the ancient Greeks. That of the interplay of chance and necessity. The emphasized qualification is crucial when the ontology of this interplay is non-classical, as in this case. First, however, I shall briefly consider a classical representational ontology of this interplay. This ontology was introduced as the atomist ontology of nature by Democritus and developed by Epicurus and Lucretius, whose De Rerum Natura is based on it. Certain individual events, such as Lucretius' famous Clinamen, a random swerve of an atom from a causal trajectory, are not given causality, are random, just as are those of the Jocasta ontology. Lucretius' account of this random swerving is not accompanied by a non-classical account of its efficacy. This makes this ontology representational and hence classical, insofar as it is assumed to be the ultimate ontology, even though it is not strictly causal. And I will jump a bit here to let's see here, all the way down to according. It's about 15 lines from the end. According to Bohr, quote, we are not dealing with an arbitrary renunciation of a more detailed analysis of atomic phenomena, but with a recognition that such an analysis is in principle no emphasis on excluded. Some of these ontological effects that we can perceive, know, describe, and so forth, compel us to infer this unthinkable, because these effects cannot be accounted for otherwise. So what Bohr said is a detailed analysis of atomic phenomena will not bring about prediction. such an analysis is in itself excluded. That is, the unthinkable is a rigorous inference. From these effects, and not merely an imaginative conception, an imaginative conception of the unimaginable. The concept of necessity or fate in Hölderlin, too, refers to this type of non-causal efficacy. It follows, of course, that efficacy is a provisional name and is ultimately inapplicable, which compels Hölderlin to appeal to the unthinkable, das Undenkbare. Although this unthinkable is ultimately unthinkable even as unthinkable. There is a mentioning of poetry in the first. I will skip that paragraph and go to the zest of it. Last paragraph on page 208. Such a pattern of events is akin to a poetic line in which words and even letters form a complex patterns, but in a way that makes their causality difficult and even impossible to establish. Hölderlin would have spoken of a rhythm of events. A rhythm, however, possibly involving counter-rhythm and caesura, emptiness, pause. The architecture of the rhythm in Hölderlin contains all three. While the confluence of rhythm, caesura and time is manifested more immediately in poetry, because these concepts originate in the structure of the poetic line. It is also found elsewhere, in mathematics, physics, philosophy, history, ethics, and politics. Everything is rhythm. Hölderlin is reported to have said, "The entire destiny is a single celestial rhythm, just as the work of art has a unique rhythm." Whether Hölderlin said exactly this or not, he indeed appears to have thought that rhythm is found everywhere, in poetry, philosophy, politics, mathematics, and science. As I argue here, Hölderlin's concepts of rhythm, caesura, and time are subject to non-classical or romantic ontology, according to which the ultimate workings of matter, or thought that give rise to the rhythm are inconceivable, unthinkable, and ultimately unthinkable even as unthinkable. There's a nice parallel here to the Apocalypse, which is also unthinkable. We can hear about it, we cannot understand it. It's a Geheimnis, so to speak. The word das Undenkbare is used by Hölderlin in defining human understanding of things as wandering beneath the unthinkable, which ultimately defines one's fate, governs it from above. What then is the architecture of Hölderlin's ontology that led him to, or emerged from, his reading of tragedy? I shall first outline this architecture in more general terms, and then consider his reading of tragedy as governed by this architecture. The most immediately manifested effects are those of the rhythmic successions of events or representations, such as those developed through the tragic hero, successions interrupted and altered by caesura, which also represents the tragic agon. This type of organization becomes the governing principle of the structure of tragedy, a principle that is found elsewhere, for example in modernist novels or actual history. And I go to this architecture is as follows, and here comes the explanation. At the ultimate ontologically available limits, all individual events, which could also be called events of thought, including those composing each rhythmic succession, are always singular and discrete relative to each other, without any causal or otherwise lawful relationship between any two events. While the ultimate efficacy of all events is, again, not available to thought, is das Undenkbare. So we have all the events and they are not connected, they are singular and discrete, but a sort of causal order which is unthinkable emerge. This is the case even when such events occur in a temporal sequence, to the degree that the concept of sequence can apply, and within its limits, because their temporal succession may only be apparent, not assured. So we cannot be certain of the temporal elements, but they will spring into action from the unthinkable.
amplify.
Can take 2 nights. I go to that. This is the case even when such events occur in a temporal sequence. To the degree that such a concept of sequence can apply, and within its limits, because their temporal succession may only be apparent and not as assured. In other words, at this ultimate available level of the constitution of events, all events are always separated from one another, and any two of them are generally unrelated to each other. And this underlying manifold of events can be random everywhere. After here establishing the randomness, I will now bring it to a closure. As in the example of Hölderlin, when I mentioned the poetic elements in a piece of poetry are unconnected. There's no connection between them. But putting them together make the unthinkable happen. All of a sudden there is rhythm, there is caesura, and that's contra-rhythm. The rhythm, the poetry, is here used by Arkady Plotnitsky to show for the ordinality as a causative. And it will be seen, as was why I wrote disturbance here. But later on, in the aftermath, when an observer comes in, and this is very important, he will see cause and effect. It would be like it was always already decided. This is usually explained by Alan Emrean, that all the other possibilities gets eradicated. I think this way is another way of approaching this. And that means that we have two concepts, so to say. We have cardinality, which is the sum of all things, where everything looks like here, without any order. The creativity of Hölderlin or any other, or of course the creativity of nature, God, or the apocalypse, will bring his decision to put them in a certain order, maybe like this. All of a sudden we get a rhythm. And maybe here we have a pause, a caesura. This will be happening at the same time at once as when Mozart made his concertos, but also be possible to develop through time and to look as if it has a temporal moment. It would look necessary. Once the poem is established, its rhythm becomes the order. And somewhere here it goes to the after effect, after the observer has seen it. This is seen as disturbance. It is disturbance. It's the necessity of disturbance to make for the stability of the rhythm. And as we know from quantum mechanics and chaos theory, this is an important feature of the universe itself. It is not something to be marginalized, abhorred, or feared. It is the true nature of how things actually present themselves by ordinality. First, it was the Word. The Word brought order to things. It was a decision. God could have decided not to create the world. And that's the disturbance or the error. Sorry to call the will of God a disturbance, but it has to be completely unorganized, unthinkable from the beginning, in order to create this greater order of ordinality as the agent, the force, if you like. It will bring out tonality. And I like this quote: "The entire destiny is a single celestial rhythm, just as the work of art has a unique rhythm." Von Arnim. This holds very true. And compare it also to a heartbeat, as we discussed many episodes ago. A strong heartbeat is characterized as having loads of disturbances in its rhythm. That makes for ordinality and strength of the heartbeat. A heartbeat that is absolutely predictable, without the unthinkable, without the innerness of the apocalyptic, looking maybe like this, is a heartbeat that is very close to cardiac arrest. This is the cardinality. Whereas the true heartbeat is irregular, not repetitive in the ordinary sense, fractally iterative. That's a better term, because iterative and repetitive is often confused by me myself for many years. But in a way, the iterative has an element of disturbance, tremor, sitten. It is non-causal. It's absolutely out of the blue. Even before it is even unthinkable. Until the very moment where the poet or the prophet or we people here decide from nowhere, this is it, this is my intention. After that's done, you get a new order that could be looked upon as it has its causes within ordinary classical physics. It would look that way, but we know that not to be the whole picture. A part of it, yes, but not the whole picture. This is very close to what Edward de Bono said about inventions. Afterwards, inventing, for instance, the wheel, it will look absolutely logical. You can understand all the steps. First, I take some spokes, I need to have a hub, and I put them together, and voila, I have a wheel. But the thing is, beforehand, it doesn't exist. And there is no way of getting to a new thing without bringing in disturbance. We cannot calculate from the pre-existences of the explicit a new invention. It has never happened. But in aftermath, after the fact, it will look as it was destined to be. This is also why determinism has such a strong grip on us. because we are more passive today than we ever were. We are already theatre goers, looking at the stage where everyone else are doing things. Mechanical, computerized, organizer, and in the end we think this is not really a possibility, the unthinkable. It's an absolute necessity. It's always present.
I guess we have only very little time left.
Sorry for taking all the space here. There you go.
Thank you. So let me write down this. You have this. It's Latin for cut, and that is the breakbeat in a verse, and you need it. So when you emphasize rhythm, like Hölderlin did, he forgets that you need also the cuts. So when you have a cut, it goes in opposition to rhythm. Or it's also part of it. But normally when you think about rhythm, we don't think about cuts and cisuras. But they are necessary part as you rightly compare them to heartbeat. So we have to emphasize these cisuras or cuts. And to be live, we need these cuts, cisuras, both in poetry, but also in our literal hearts. We need them. So we have to also look for the silence. Silence is important. There are if you want to show this in mark these cisuras, there are different ways. You can show them as slashes like this or like this. Sometimes you can mark them as cuts, like commas, but they are the same cisuras. And these silences are as important, and we need them in the rhythm. These cisuras and cuts. The silence is important for there to be music. So the silence is like the frame. You cannot cut out the frame or the silence and only have the music. So that's my...
Yes, thank you very much, Kalle. Maybe I didn't press it enough, but the caesura is in the thinking of Hölderlin. Very good, very good. The pause is of extraordinary importance. It's even the name of the title here, let's see, of this subchapter. It's called Rhythm, Caesura and the Unthinkable in Hölderlin. And the caesura can also be seen as another way of maybe pedagogically understand a break from the rhythm is also a sort of a caesura. Another rhythm doesn't follow the original rhythm, and therefore it could be seen from the point of view of rhythm as a caesura from the rhythm. So it could be a certain life to the caesura. But the pauses are extraordinarily important. They are important, as we mentioned many times before, in physics. We spoke about absence in physics as being of extraordinary importance. Coming all the way from Stephen M. Rosen, Apeiron, which you might remember maybe 1,000 episodes ago, where the horror vacui is very integral in creation. And then we have what's her name now, when we spoke about contrafactory events, contrafactory things in physics, where the caesura, or the cut in physics, is an absolute constitutive part of physics.
Is it the remarks Stallov? No.
No, I will find her name. It was some time ago. But this example is good. The air of the cup is made of emptiness. It's a caesura. And it's an integral part on how to construct it, how to use it, how to be cup. Also the inner emptiness is very important. And I think that goes to show, only taking Newtonian classical physics as Carl Sagan, as we mentioned, it becomes unbalanced. And I would say he had an unbalanced character to him. His whole body was sort of slanted forward. So this, I would say, is another way of bringing in wholeness again. Because we need a whole also in time, Kalle, which is very good. Thank you very much for that. There's not only a whole in matter or existence, the horovaki, there is a whole in time. And it's integral for time to have these wholes, although they are unthinkable. I say thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, dear colleague, and have a very pleasant afternoon.